Welcome back to Second Helping, the podcast of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, alongside my great friend and longtime co-host here on Second Helping. That, of course, Mr. Brent Beaird, college football analyst for First Coast News down in Jacksonville, Florida. Longtime voter in the race for the most prestigious individual honor in collegiate athletics, that one being the Heisman Trophy. And Brent, it's been a little bit since we last caught up here on the podcast. And as you might expect, no shortage of topics. I guess most recently, we thought the college football playoff people were getting together to discuss a format for a 12-team playoff, Brent. And by the time the few days transpired, we were hearing about potentially a 14-team playoff.
Yeah, it's good to be back traveling, second helping. And I remember the days basically when you and I started working together in the early 90s. And Trav, there was, as you remember, I would say after the national championship game before spring practice, I mean, we almost hunted for things to do, didn't we? That is not the case right now. And the playoffs is certainly one of them. Tony Petitti, the commissioner of the Big Ten, has kind of been the guy who is looking at this. And I know a lot, it's gotten some pushback of, well, let's get 12 going first, and I understand that. But, I mean, the positive thing with this to me is you particularly got the two commissioners and Sankey and also representing the Big Ten, Petitti, that are thinking a little bit ahead of the box and ahead of time and working on some things, Trav, that if you wait on Congress or if you wait on the NCAA, frankly, may never get done. So I think they'll go through the allowing the 12 to do what it needs to do. But look, I think what we're getting maybe is a little bit of forward thinking in college football. Are we used to that right now?
No, we are not, especially under the previous sort of governing body, that it feels like the SEC and the Big Ten in this almost unholy alliance, Brent.
Yeah.
These two leagues coming together. It's like the Corleones and the Battaglias and the Godfather.
Yeah.
Breaking bread, sharing a hug maybe. It's what it seems to speak to when you look at it from our perspective. And, this format too that has been talked about potentially with the college football playoff. Would it be 6 conference champions? Would it be 5? Could it be as few as 4? Is it looking more and more, though, like the 5-7 format, assuming it's a 12-team playoff, which it's going to be for the upcoming year? I guess the 14 would be more of a 2026 is when that could come into play, perhaps at the earliest. But is it looking like a 5-7 when we look at conference champions versus at-large berths?
Well, I think it will be for 2 years.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, in 24 and 25, we're okay, but they're still trying to figure out what's going to happen beyond that. And also to your point, Trav, we've got 5 right now, but look, if this ACC goes where it might, and certainly FSU is negotiating to get out right now. And I think following that, you've got some other schools, North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, Miami. The reality is, Travis, by the time we get to 26, man alive, could this thing at that point be a 4-8 model with maybe the ACC really struggling then?
Yeah, and then the Notre Dame question
comes
into play, right?
Absolutely, it does. And look, I have seen more discussion about Notre Dame going to the Big Ten this week than I ever really have. But look, you and I have been covering Notre Dame for decades now. They cherish that independence and being on their own. But with the way this is set up right now, starting this year, even an undefeated Notre Dame would be like the fifth seed that will be involved in that, which is pretty fascinating to think about. So, Trev, we're thinking about things we never thought would come to be during this time, and almost anything's possible.
Yeah, in the last 2 or 3 eras of college football, it seems like it's largely been Notre Dame and college football, almost
Yes.
like Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, or Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Well,
Yeah.
it's looking more and more like at some point, anyway, Notre Dame's just going to have to be a part of the band with
Yes.
everyone else as we move forward. Now, in relation to some potential changes where December scheduling is concerned, this is another area where I'm not sure a lot of forward thinking has been drawn
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
because when you think about the playoff with 12 teams going into play this next December, and then you think about transfer portal windows, and you think about the early signing date, and then you got conference championship games that you're still going to be playing. Explain to me how that's all going to work potentially, Brent.
Well, they're still trying to figure that out. And the problem is they got themselves into this mess a few years ago with basically you've got finals, you've got bowl games or playoff games. You've also got the early signing period. You've also got the transfer portal. But what has happened this week is, again, you're seeing this more of the leadership of Greg Sankey and some of the committees deciding to do something different and take the early signing day off of the 20th of December, where it is now. And look, the reality is, travel the 20th December, this December, is
First
going to
round
be
games.
the start of
Yeah.
the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's mind-boggling that you're trying to do all that. So, look, they may miss the optimum date a little bit, but I do give them credit for some forward thinking in these commissioners getting this done again a whole lot quicker than the NCAA or anybody else is. And I don't know if maybe moving it the first week of December is the perfect spot, but again, give them credit for trying to untangle this mess that they've got in December.
And when you think about the playoff coming up and the potential, I guess, for rematches, and I've seen some way too early 12 team
Yes.
brackets or some projections for the first playoff that we're going to have. I've seen Alabama, Missouri in an 8-9 game, and
Yeah.
Missouri's going to travel to Tuscaloosa during the regular season
Yeah.
in
Really.
2024. So when you start looking at it from that perspective, I know one of the biggest reasons, if not the primary reason, why we are even where we are today is because of a rematch that capped the 2011 season. Let's be honest here.
Yes.
Alabama LSU in that 9-6 overtime thriller in Tuscaloosa, followed by the rematch of the two in New Orleans in what was then the BCS national championship game, fostered a lot of the change that we're seeing now. Well, that and the almighty dollar. Let's not
Yeah.
forget about that. But I guess that's a scenario that we could see a good bit of, and also if you include the conference championship games in that.
In regular season conference championship games and also in the playoffs. I mean,
Yeah,
imagine Ohio State and Michigan
could
playing
have a
three times.
trilogy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, Trev, I know it's a different sport, but is this almost like Duke Carolina playing three times in a year?
Well, and you got leagues like the SEC, they're doing away with divisions.
Yes.
So that opens the possibility even more. At least with divisions, you kind of had a chance to not have a rematch of a regular season game. Now with just the 16 teams in the same pot, I mean, you could have a regular season. You could easily have a rematch in the conference championship game, and then and then again in the college football playoff.
Yeah, well, and look, I'm kind of wondering from a practical standpoint how that will go over with the buying public and the ticket man,
Yeah.
and how all that's going to go too. But still, when you look at it, I mean, the stakes get higher every game, right? You go from the regular season to set you up for the conference championship game, and then you get the conference championship game, you're setting yourselves up for the playoffs. So
You
I
know who
get,
this throws under the bus too? It's going to throw the selection committee under the bus because, right
yes,
or wrong, they're going to feel pressure not to produce rematches.
good point.
And so, from a seeding perspective, that could get kind of wonky. And you could maybe have a team that ends up as a 9 seed, should probably be a 7 playing at home
Yeah,
in the first round, but for the sake of not having a rematch, ends up on the road
yeah, yeah.
somewhere as a 9 seed in an 8-9 game. This is, man,
Well, and I wonder.
potential for some controversy.
Oh, no
Brent,
doubt.
imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
We were
Trav,
going to eliminate all that,
yeah,
remember?
yeah, sure we were. And I
Yeah.
wonder if this no rematch situation, or they thinking ahead a little bit to what you just said, and trying to prevent a team from being misseeded, if we can use it that way, instead of where they should be seated.
Yeah. It's going to still be a fiasco, regardless of what anybody tries to tell you or reassure you of as we move forward into this expanded playoff era of college football. Now, let me get this straight here in some of the pre-show stuff that you sent me. Scoring and offense in college football were down
Yes.
in
Yeah.
2023, and not just down, but down again. Everything that we have believed with our eyes, anyway, has sort of pointed to scoring being on the consistent ascent here over the last few years, the last multiple years, the last decade or so, but that apparently hasn't been the case.
Well, that's fascinating to think about, and I give Dennis Dodd some credit for this. But I mean, average scoring is the lowest in so nine. Total offense is down for the fifth consecutive year, Trav, lowest since 2010. Average yards passing, the lowest since 2010. And the question is, well, why is it going in that direction? Now, some of that is a little bit about the change in the rules for first down and the clock running. But listen, we said that, frankly, when all this is done, that there's only going to be a few plays, like 5 on average every game, that they're missing, and maybe 5 minutes of playing time altogether. But the thing that's interesting is, and for guys like you and I who appreciate the triple option and good defense, part of this is because, and we've got that formula that Michigan had this year of having a terrific defense and being able to run the ball. Well, maybe some of that's coming back a little bit because the defensive linemen have become more important, and the defenses are getting smarter. Look, in the 4 decades that we've worked together, one thing we've been told by the Alabama coaches, by coaches like Corky Rogers at the Bowl School, as Trav, they can label it whatever they want to, but football is cyclical, and as I used to hear from coaches covering them around here, is there's nothing new under the sun. So could we see a little bit of reemergence, Trav, with defense now?
Well, I think the last 3 years, that's been the MO. And you look at Georgia's back-to-back national championship
No
teams, I
doubt.
think most people look more at the defense for both those teams than they did the offense, even with Brock Bowers on the offensive side and Stetson Bennett having a couple of great seasons, or good enough seasons anyway. And then Michigan, as you said, same type of thing. How many games in 2023 did Michigan score 40 or more? I don't think the number's very high.
No,
Um,
no.
but it's also a stylistic thing as well. I think you got a couple of offenses in Georgia and Michigan that really employ the tight ends, really believe in running the football. But again, as you said, defense. You think about 2019 and 2020, LSU and Alabama in those back-to-back seasons, even 2018 with Clemson when it knocked off Alabama out west in the national championship game. Those were certainly by Alabama standards a team that was more identity based on offense with Mac Jones, with
Yes.
Devontae Smith, with Najee Harris, with those other receivers that they had for sure. So, that's where you probably had your peak offensive years, and then 21, 22, 23. It's kind of reverted back to, I won't say retro football because it's modernistic in a lot of the concepts that those offenses have employed, NFL based type stuff, but not the high flying Joe Burrow, Devontae Smith type of offenses that we saw in those previous seasons leading up to them. Hey, let's get back to 2026 a little bit because this has been talked about a lot within the league, Brent, as far as SEC games. Is it going to go to 9 games? It's been long thought that that would be the case. Is it looking maybe more and more like perhaps coinciding with a 14 team college football playoff field that we have 9 SEC games in place in a couple of 3 years?
Well, and this is fascinating for certainly what we do here on Second Helpings. And again, a lot of this was stirred up by Chris Del Conte, the Texas AD, who was kind of having a state of the program meeting with the media. And obviously, he was asked that question. And how he answered it was we're looking at the 8 game in 24 and 25, and maybe by 26 we'll be ready to go to 9 games. Now, again, I'm just wondering if he got a call from the commissioner's office a few days after that, Trav, saying, well, these things are yet to be determined, but it certainly got people to thinking about where that was going to be going. And look, I think we've all thought that this would eventually happen for economics as much as anything else. I mean, certainly Alabama playing Georgia is going to get them a lot more fan interest, money, et cetera, than playing Vanderbilt. And no disparaging, it's Vanderbilt. That's just the reality of it. So it's got folks thinking again and again. I'll be careful to say nothing official, Trav, from that commissioner's office on this, but the media ate this up, and they were also intrigued to say DeConte mentioned we're looking forward to playing our rival Texas A&M, and oh, by the way, we sure would like that game to be on Thanksgiving night.
Yeah.
So he gave the media a lot to think about, didn't he?
Yeah, he absolutely did. Someone who still resonates and gives the media plenty to think about is now former Alabama head coach Nick Saban. Still takes some getting used to in saying that, doesn't it? But Saban, we've heard from here of late, took a little bit of a break following the seismic news that he was done after 17 seasons of coaching the Alabama Crimson Tide. But in the past, there's been a lot of talk about, hey, put Nick Saban in charge, make him the czar of college football. And I wouldn't go as far as to say he's campaigning for that type of role, but he has made some recent statements that make it sound like, anyway, he is going to advocate for, some things that would perhaps rein back in the situation that we have right now, the toothpaste out of the tube, so to speak,
Yeah.
with NIL, with collectives, with the transfer portal, with the recruiting calendar. Did you take that away from some of the things we've heard from Nick lately?
No question. And I think a couple of things with this quickly would be, I mean, Trav, even when he was coaching, there was still whether this was locally in the state of Alabama or when he was doing a national interview, there has been for I think quite a while now, people going to him in the media looking at for him to be a visionary and what do you see and how we fix a lot of this. And I'm not so sure. And as you mentioned, he's not interested in getting a title. That's the last thing his personality would want. But I do think he loves the game. I think it's important to him. And if he could be, as he says, the voice of reason and helping straighten some of these things out, I think people would be wise and these committees would be wise to listen to what he has to say.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think Nick Saban as an advocate could be more beneficial to the group of five teams out there
Good,
and
good
programs
point.
out there
Yeah,
because he is in favor of more of an even playing field across
right.
the board. Did he have it better than pretty much every other program out there during his time at Alabama? He absolutely did. Did he try to maintain that advantage throughout his time in Tuscaloosa? Absolutely, and rightfully so, he did. But now, as more of an advocate for the sport, I think the way he views things and what he would like to see, whether or not those things are realistic at this point or not, because as I said earlier, you've let, you've opened Pandora's
Yeah,
box. It's going to be
right.
tough to get a lot of this stuff back in there. There's could certainly be far more structure in play than there is right now. And I think that's where he could perhaps make his biggest impact from that standpoint. But if I'm a group of five, I'm for Nick Saban having an influential voice based on what I've heard from him to this point. Hey, you talk about Alabama and no Nick Saban. Well, it is very new in Tuscaloosa these days as Kalen DeBoer takes over the Alabama Crimson Tide. You've had some staff changes already. This NFL stuff with college coaches, that's not going to end anytime soon, as we've talked about for a long, long time here on the program. And then also from a transfer portal perspective, I'll say this for Kalen DeBoer. He walked into a really good roster. And Nick
Sure
Saban
did.
did not leave the cupboard bare by any means. But what we've seen from DeBoer between retention of a lot of that roster, he did obviously lose the likes of Caleb Downs to Ohio State, Isaiah Bond to Texas. So there were some significant departures, but as a whole, I thought Alabama weathered that pretty well. And then DeBoer and this evolving new staff has done a nice job, it seems, of adding to that roster.
Yeah, they really have bringing in Michigan safety Keon Sabb, also Washington tight end Josh. Help me on this,
Cuevas.
Cuevas,
Yep.
and those are two nice pickups. I know he's had. It took him some time to get the staff settled down. Obviously, keeping Freddie Roach in the like. But look, some of these guys I think are going to be very interesting a lot, and Robert Gillespie, by the way, too. A lot of folks they may not be household names in the state of Alabama, but I would argue right now that this is a very good staff, and I think you'll see that pay some real dividends for them. I think DeBoer has been open to the media. I think he has done and said a lot of the right things. That's not going to say that there's not an adjustment period, that won't be difficult for him at times. But listen, and the spring's going to be fascinating in Alabama as he puts his scheme in and so forth. So I think he'll always, Trev, and I know you're writing about it or discussing it almost on a daily basis. I think he's weathered the storm rather well so far.
Yeah, I agree. All things considered. But there is still change that's going on at the University of Alabama here in the last couple of days. Brent, we have come to learn that Eli Gold will not be back as the voice of the Alabama Crimson Tide, at least from a football perspective. And unceremoniously, you
Yeah.
get the feeling is from the Eli viewpoint of how this separation has come about. Alabama, it's been pretty messy. You really hate to see this in a
Yeah.
lot of ways because it's been, you know, 34, 35 years of Eli being the voice of Alabama, kind of puts him up there with the Larry Munsons, with the John Wards, with the Jack Crystals, Brent, when you talk about SEC voices of the past. But Eli says he's going to keep working. Meanwhile, Alabama moving on to Chris Stewart, a longtime contributor, a heavy contributor to Alabama athletics from a play-by-play perspective. Again, unfortunate that it's gotten a little messy here, but you also are happy for Chris Stewart, very capable replacement there. And you're glad that Eli, first and foremost, given the health issues he's
Yeah.
had, feels like there's still more in the tank. I
Yeah.
mean, that to me is a positive thing. But again, just would have liked to have seen the break be a little bit less messy than it's been.
I wish what they would have done would to have and look, if he could travel, that if he could have had one more year and just announce that, and knowing that the transition was coming in, I certainly think with the number of years that he served, that he would certainly deserve that. I'm with you. It doesn't look good in some ways, and I do hope that soon that everyone will be able to make up and appreciate what they did. Hopefully they'll bring him back for a game and recognize him on the field. I mean, they could certainly add his name to the Alabama play-by-play booth at Bryant-Denny Stadium, something of that effect. But also to your point, and he thinks he can keep going, and I understand that may be something on the professional level that he gets into during this time also. But certainly kudos to Eli for overcoming his health issues, and I just hope, Travis, in the next few months that both parties can make amends, and this will end well as far as his relationship with Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Eli, as we know, he's been more than just the voice of Alabama football. A lot more. He's done hockey. Obviously, he's done NASCAR. I think there may be as many or more people who recognize him for his NASCAR work
Yeah, absolutely.
than even what he has done during all these years at Alabama. But I get it. I get it from Eli's perspective. You feel like you can still
Yeah,
work. And I said this at the time. I could easily envision. I don't think for Eli it has to be a Power Five job or a major league job. I think Eli, it would be fine calling AA baseball if
yeah,
it
I
came
think you
down to
would
it,
too. I
or
agree with that.
ECHL hockey.
Yeah,
Um, or NASCAR or whatever. I don't think it has to be something specific, but happy for Chris Stewart too. He's earned this opportunity, and I think Chris, and the logistics of it, having the who knows? I don't know if Eli was going to be more of a home game only announcer moving forward. If you're Alabama, you want that consistency in the booth, and it's at no fault of Eli
sure.
if
Right.
that's the case, but kind of understanding of that the other way around as well. We talked about some projections already for the 2024 season, Brent. Um, there's talk that Florida's schedule, if it isn't the toughest schedule ever,
Yeah, yeah,
it's certainly right there in the mix for it, at least from where we sit right now on February the 23rd. And I I guess analytically, if you just look at it on paper, I mean, there's a floor for Florida where a 2-10 season could come into play, which obviously would mean a coaching change in Gainesville. But that is again, that's what Billy Napier is staring in the face going into the upcoming season.
well, look, a lot of this is going to depend early. They've got crucial games coming up, but I'd say they're winnable games. This Miami opener, At home, I think is a game they can win. Sanford's a game they can win, but look, Sanford's more dangerous than people realize. Then they've got A&M, also Mississippi State and UCF. Trev, look, I mean, they could be 2-3, 3-2, but I think they could be maybe 4-1 in that first five, which would be a big help for them before they get into Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. Oh man! But so key for them is going to be how they do early. And Trav, listen, it's not just for Napier, but how big is that opener for Cristobal at Miami in the struggles that they've had? We need to keep our eye on that game because of the importance of it, frankly.
Yeah, and look, it's all about the snowball effect of perception.
Yes.
You're either on the right side of it or you're on the wrong side of it. And unfortunately for Billy Napier in Florida right now, he's on the downhill side of where it's coming from. And so it's going to take that kind of potential start that you alluded to, a 4-1 maybe start, maybe a win over Miami to kind of turn that thing around, because it's real. Perception's never been more real than it is in today's society,
right?
Let alone college football, just society in general. So when you start applying it to something like college football, and momentum is real. And so Florida really, really, really needs that kind of start. More specifically, I think Billy Napier needs it in terms of his shelf life as the head coach at the University of Florida, and perhaps even at the AD level. Scott Strickland might need that kind of start. Hey, you talk about coaches and trouble keeping them. Georgia is kind of the reverse of Florida right now.
Yes.
Georgia would love to keep coaches, but because of the success in large part that Kirby Smart has enjoyed, it's been a challenge, especially this offseason. And of course, most recently, we see even at this sort of later stage of the early part of the offseason, there's going to be some more change at Georgia.
Well, they certainly lost Brian McClendon to the NFL, as a lot of college coaches are going to the NFL for an easier life. We probably couldn't have said that 20 to 30 years ago, but you can now. And it's, I don't think this is official yet, but I know Dell McGee has been one of the favorites for that Georgia State job, and to lose him. But look, this is something that's become real reality for Kirby, is keeping that staff together. Now, look, they're going to be favored, and we'll certainly get into more of the details later, as probably the number one team, certainly to make the playoffs and probably go in as a preseason number one. But listen, Trav, compared to last year, doesn't Georgia need, number one, some of this staff to settle down, and number two, they certainly need a quieter off season without the difficulty they had with players and automobiles and so forth as they did last year.
Yeah, I think Georgia, though, has reached a point like Alabama did under Nick Saban. Yes. Georgia has the luxury that as long as Kirby Smart's there, they're recruiting now to a brand.
They are.
And, the one thing Georgia doesn't have, as much as we hear about the advantages that a lot of these elite programs have over the G5s and even a lot of the other Power Fives, is this sort of endless well of funds. And look, the SEC in general, those schools, those 14, 16 schools soon, that is true to some extent. But, what Kirby has in terms of still, even with NIL, even with collective, even with Carson Beck buying a brand new Lamborghini, the thing that they still have that is most valuable to them is the Georgia brand, and as an extension of that, the National Football League and the players that they continue to send to the highest level of the sport. So I think Kirby's fine. I think George is fine. He's still got his coordinators pretty much in place, right?
Yes.
Added Travaris Robinson from Alabama, really good recruiter, good position coach, defensive coordinator experience in the past. He's worked with Will Muschamp, uh, previously. So I think it's still going to be okay. I think Georgia will be. I think
Well,
the dogs will be all right.
and I will say this too, Trev. Um, you won't have this discussion in the preseason about how easy this Georgia schedule is going to be, starting with
No,
Clemson, a trip to Tuscaloosa. As a matter of fact, Trev, they've got Alabama and Auburn back to back, and then you've got a mammoth game at Austin, Texas, that is coming before the Florida game in Jacksonville. Ole Miss and Tennessee back to back. So that Georgia schedule tightens up quite a bit this year.
yeah, it's not so much who Georgia's losing; it's what Georgia's picking up
Mm-hmm.
from a schedule perspective.
Yes.
No doubt
Yeah.
about that. And a lot of other SEC programs are saying in unison, it's about time that the dogs were stressed in that type of way. So good stuff as always with Brent Beaird, college football analyst for First Coast News. Brent, anything else before we get out of here?
Travis, just to hit a few teams. Real quick, Trey Hawley at LSU denying involvement in a shooting, one of their running backs. That's unfortunate. Kentucky got ex-Michigan signee Jayden Smith. He's an outside linebacker. Texas has a lot of contract extensions, including Steve Sarkisian and Ty Chappell, the cornerback.
Thanks, Alabama, for those, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. No doubt about that. And listen, Travis and I are keeping our eyes on this Florida State and ACC situation. And some of our listeners thinking, well, what does that have to do with the SEC? Well, I can tell you this right now, one way or another, Trav, all these conferences are interlinked somehow. And some movement there in the ACC could mean some of those teams joining the SEC coming up in the next few years. Oh, my.
Oh, it's changing every day, Brent Beard. Well, Brent, as always, a lot of fun here on Second Helping. We certainly appreciate everyone who continues to tune in to the podcast and look forward to doing it again soon.
Me too, bud. Always enjoy it. Take care.
For Brent Beard, Travis Reier, thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, so long, everybody.